They shoved me face first into the mud, laughing, filming, mocking me like I was trash left on the curb just because I reached for a half-eaten sandwich. And behind their cruel laughter stood a name no one dared challenge, the councilwoman mother of one of the boys, with her power suit, perfect smile, and an iron grip on the town's silence. But they didn't know the woman they pushed down had fire beneath the dirt, and when a community saw what they did, the uprising began. They shoved me, their laughter sliced through the cold morning like a blade, sharp, cruel, echoing down the alleyway where I had taken shelter. My body hit the muddy ground with a sickening squelch. The weight of their amusement pressed down harder than the fall itself. All that for a sandwich, one of them cackled, filming with his phone. "You nasty old hag." My hands trembled as I tried to rise the sludge clinging to my coat like a second skin. It was the only coat I had, a gift from a kind nurse last winter when my fingers turned blue from frostbite. Now soaked, ruined, like my dignity, like whatever remained of the life I had once known. I'm called Miss Etta, or sometimes just that old lady with the cart. I'm 71 years old. Once a mother, once a grandmother, once someone. Now I was just invisible, until they made me visible in the worst possible way. A boy no older than 16 held the phone higher, getting the angle right. "This gon' go viral." He smirked. "Granny in the gutter." And then they were gone, sneakers slapping pavement, leaving me in the muck, and silence, their laughter still ringing in my ears. I sat there, frozen, not from the cold, but from shame. My pride wasn't just bruised. It was shattered. But I need you to understand something. This wasn't just about a sandwich. It was about survival. It was about the way people walk past me every day like I'm debris on the sidewalk. It was about what happens when cruelty becomes content. I used to be someone. I had a home. I had a garden. I baked lemon cake on Sundays for my grandkids, and their laughter was the music of my soul. Then came the sickness, the layoffs, the eviction, the night my daughter said she couldn't take me in, the shelters that turned me away because I still had too much income, a laughable $320 a month in Social Security. And now here I was, filthy, broken, broadcast for laughs. But let me tell you what else happened that day. There was a girl. Her name was Rosa. She worked at the flower shop down the street. She saw the whole thing from the shop window. And she didn't look away. She didn't pull out her phone or turn her head. She came out into the cold, kneeling beside me. Her hands warm, her words warmer. "Ma'am, are you all right? I saw what they did. I'm calling someone. I'm not letting this slide." I wanted to protest, to tell her it didn't matter, that nothing ever changed, that kindness was fleeting, and cruelty always won. But something in her eyes stopped me. She wasn't just angry, she was furious, and she was filming too, but not me. She was filming the alley, the direction the boys had gone, her voice firm and clear as she described what she'd witnessed. Her hand gently brushed the mud from my face. "I'm going to help you," she said. Help? A word I hadn't heard in so long it sounded foreign, dangerous even. She called Officer Daniels, a local beat cop she knew personally. "He's one of the good ones," she whispered. "Trust me." And within 10 minutes he was there. Not with handcuffs or suspicion, but with concern and compassion. He wrapped a blanket around me, asked if I needed medical help, then listened. Really listened to Rosa's story. I watched his jaw clench as Rosa played the footage of the boys. watched his eyes darken as he saw them push me like I was nothing. "Don't worry, Miss Etta," he said. "We'll find them." I wanted to believe him. But belief is a luxury when you've been betrayed by the world too many times. That night, Rosa insisted I stay at her apartment. She had a tiny studio above the flower shop. She made me tea, gave me warm socks, and wrapped me in a quilt her grandmother had made. "You're safe now," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "And tomorrow, we're going to do something about this." I fell asleep on her couch, the scent of lavender drifting from a vase nearby. For the first time in years, I didn't feel scared. I didn't feel hunted by the shadows of the street. The next morning, the video Rosa had posted had already gone viral. But not the boys' version. Hers. The one that showed me being shoved, humiliated. Her caption: "This is Miss Etta. She's someone's grandma. She deserves dignity. Help us find justice." Within hours, there were thousands of comments. Strangers expressing outrage, people offering blankets, donations, shelter. A local pastor reached out. A nonprofit called Street Angels messaged Rosa directly. Even the mayor's office issued a statement condemning the act and promising an investigation. I watched it unfold like a dream, and yet part of me remained guarded. People are quick to anger online, just as quick to forget. But Rosa didn't forget. Neither did Officer Daniels. By sunset, they had the names of 2 of the boys. They were from the nearby school, sons of a prominent businessman and a city councilwoman. Of course, they denied it at first, said it was just a prank, that they didn't mean anything. But the footage spoke louder than their words. A press conference was called, and for the first time in a very, very long time, I was invited to speak. I stood before the cameras in a borrowed coat, my spine trembling but unbroken. "My name is Etta Mae Johnson," I said into the microphone. "I am 71 years old, and I am not invisible." I told my story. The fall, the mud, the laughter, but also the kindness, the hands that reached down to lift me up. And as I looked out at the crowd, I saw more than reporters. I saw neighbors. I saw kids from the school holding signs that said, "We stand with Miss Etta." Something was shifting. That night, I returned to Rosa's apartment not as a burden, but as a guest of honor. And as I drifted off to sleep, I realized something. This wasn't the end of my story. This was just the beginning. I woke up to the soft rustle of fabric, Rosa folding blankets, her curls tied up in a messy bun, her hands moving with quiet care. She hadn't asked for this. A stranger sleeping on her couch, a city's outrage piling up in her inbox. But she took it all on like she was born for it. "Miss Etta," she said gently. They found all 3 of them. My heart clenched. My mind went back to the alley, their faces blurred by rage, by shock, by the sting of humiliation. I wanted to forget them. But part of healing, I was beginning to understand, meant looking the wound right in the face. "The city's school board is holding an emergency hearing," Rosa continued. "Parents press community reps, and they want you to be there." I blinked. "Me? Why?" "Because they think hearing from you, seeing you, might force the board to act. Expel them. Press charges even." I wasn't sure how to feel about that. A part of me wanted justice, no needed it. But another part, buried deeper still, hesitated. What if they laughed again? What if I stood there and they saw only a weak, pitiful woman? "Rosa," I whispered, my voice fraying. "What if I break in front of them?" She knelt beside me, took my hand. Then let them see a woman who broke and still stood back up. The school board meeting was held in the gymnasium of Jefferson High, a place I'd once visited years ago when my grandson had performed in the spring play. It felt like another life, like someone else's memory. Now I was walking through those same doors, escorted by Officer Daniels and surrounded by flashing cameras. The teens who had pushed me were seated on the far side of the room, their parents beside them, tight-lipped, red-faced. One mother, a councilwoman I vaguely remembered from local news, refused to make eye contact. The board sat at a long table draped in dark blue cloth. 7 members, some young, some old, all silent waiting. The principal, a tall, balding man with glasses and sorrow in his eyes, stepped forward first. "We have reviewed the footage. We recognize the severity of what occurred. Miss Etta, would you care to speak?" I rose slowly. My knees creaked, but my resolve did not. "My name is Etta Mae Johnson," I began. "I've lived in this town longer than most of you have had children. I taught Sunday school. I led food drives. I raised my babies here." A hush fell over the crowd. "I lost my home when my husband died, and the bills kept coming. I lost my health insurance when the factory closed. But I never lost my pride until 3 boys shoved me into mud like I was less than human." I turned toward the boys. "You didn't just push an old woman. You pushed a life, a memory, 100 Sunday mornings and holiday meals and love letters. You reduced all of that to a joke. But I'm still here." Their eyes dropped. Even their parents looked shaken. "I'm not asking for vengeance," I said finally. "I'm asking for accountability. For you to look at what we've become if we let things like this go unpunished." When I sat down, the room stayed quiet for a long moment. Then a hand rose. It was Jaden, a senior at the school. He wore a letterman jacket and had been in the crowd the day before holding a sign. He stepped forward, voice shaking. "I want to say sorry, Miss Etta. Not just for what happened, but for all the times we saw you out there and did nothing. We let the world treat you like you didn't matter. That ends today." And one by one others joined him. Students, teachers, a cafeteria worker, even a janitor who said he'd once given me coffee and wished he'd done more. That room, once so cold and procedural, transformed. Not into a courtroom, but into something more sacred. A reckoning. The board voted unanimously to suspend the boys and require them to perform 300 hours of community service, some of it they specified at the Street Angels shelter. One parent protested, claiming it would embarrass her son, but Principal Harris cut in firmly. They already embarrassed themselves. This is a chance to grow. As we exited the gym, a reporter rushed up. "Miss Etta, how do you feel right now?" I paused. "Seen," I said. "For the first time in a long time, I feel seen." That night, Rosa hosted a small gathering at the shop. There were lights strung from the ceiling, paper lanterns glowing like tiny moons. A few folks brought food-collared greens, fried catfish, and peach cobbler that tasted like memory. Miss Etta said a soft voice. I turned. It was Jaden, the boy from the meeting. He looked nervous. "I brought this for you," he said, holding out a framed drawing. It was a sketch of me as I'd stood in front of the board, eyes, fierce, back-straight fists, unclenched, but strong. Underneath he had written, "Dignity doesn't age," and "Strength wears many faces." Tears spilled freely from my eyes. Not from pain, not from grief, but from something I hadn't felt in years. Hope. Later, as the party died down, and Rosa dozed beside a stack of unsold roses, I stepped out onto the stoop. The city was the same. Cold, loud, unforgiving. But I wasn't the same anymore. Something had shifted inside me. A kindling. A warmth. Because when the mud dries, what's left behind is not the dirt, but the imprint of your survival. And mine was just beginning. They said the worst storms start small, like a wind stirring dust, or a boy pressing record. I didn't know it yet, but something bigger than justice was building in our town, bigger than apologies or school board meetings. What had happened to me, what had been done to me, was striking a nerve far deeper than I could imagine. It started with an email. Rosa read it aloud over breakfast the next morning, her voice breathless, barely able to believe it. "Miss Etta," she said, "CNN wants to interview you." I blinked. "The television," she laughed. "Yes, real national news. They saw your video. They want to do a story about the homeless crisis about you, about how the town is responding." I stared at her toast halfway to my mouth. I hadn't been on television since the 1980s when Channel 9 interviewed me about my award-winning rose garden. "I'm not sure I'm ready for that kind of attention," I muttered. "You don't need to be ready," she said. "You just need to be honest." That's what touched people in the first place. You. Still, I hesitated, because there was something I hadn't told Rosa, something I hadn't told anyone. That day, as the sun struggled through thick gray clouds, I walked alone back to the alley, back to where it happened. It had been power washed, but I still saw it. The mud, the cruelty, my fall. I sat on the same cold concrete ledge and pulled a photo from my coat pocket. It was creased edges, torn, but the image still held strong my daughter Melinda and her two boys Elijah and Carter. Their faces were soft, radiant, with a joy I barely remembered. I hadn't spoken to Melinda in 3 years, not since the night I called from the shelter and she said she couldn't help anymore. Said she had her own children to raise, that I needed to figure it out. I had figured it out all right. I figured out how to sleep upright with one eye open, how to keep my food away from rats, how to wash in gas station sinks and pray I didn't smell too bad when I sat on church pews. But I hadn't figured out how to stop loving her, or missing her, and I hadn't figured out how to forgive. That night I sat with Rosa again, this time helping her clip stems in the shop. "Tell me something," I asked, snipping a pale tulip. "Why do you help people like me?" Rosa paused. Her eyes softened. "My abuela was a maid, immigrant, couldn't read English. One day she slipped at work and broke her hip. The people she worked for just left her on the floor. My mom found her hours later." She exhaled slowly. She never walked right again. But she always said, "If we don't look out for each other, mija, no one will." I nodded, the pain in my chest tight but familiar. "Pain recognizes pain. You know," she added, smiling softly. "You could speak at the youth center. The director saw your story, said the kids need someone like you, someone real. Me, real, a voice for the voiceless, an elder among the forgotten." "I'll think about it," I whispered. 2 days later, I stood before a room of restless teenagers, some slouched, some whispering, some scrolling on their phones. I took a deep breath. "My name is Miss Etta," I said, "and I know what it feels like to be overlooked." A few glanced up. I wasn't always on the streets. I worked. I loved. I paid taxes. I danced. I lived. Until I couldn't. And then I told them everything. The factory layoff. The eviction. The night I slept under the bus stop and woke to find my shoes stolen. The boys who shoved me. The world that looked away. But I also told them about Rosa, about Jaden, about the kindness of strangers, about redemption. When I finished, the room was silent. Then a girl with cornrows and cracked red nail polish raised her hand. "Can I hug you?" I nodded, and just like that, I was wrapped in arms that trembled. Others followed. One boy cried into my shoulder. Another promised to take blankets to the shelter that weekend. It was a room full of cracked mirrors, finding new reflections. That night, as Rosa closed shop, she handed me a thick envelope. "What's this?" I asked. "Donations. From the community. From people who saw the video. Enough to get you into transitional housing. A real bed, Miss Etta." My hands shook, but my voice didn't. "I want to start something," I said. "Not just a roof. A movement." Rosa blinked. "What do you mean?" "I want to help others like me. I want to make sure no one has to wait in an alley to be seen. I want to call it the Mud Project, because that's where it started. But it's not where it ends." And just like that, the fire spread. The Mud Project began as a single post online, but it became something bigger. Donations poured in. A local church offered space. Volunteers signed up for shifts serving hot meals, giving haircuts, handing out blankets. And they asked me to lead it. Me, the woman they once walked past. I sat in front of a mirror in Rosa's bathroom one morning, staring at myself. The lines on my face were deep, but the eyes, oh, they were alive again. And when I stepped out onto the porch that day, I didn't carry shame on my shoulders. I carried purpose. Because it turns out when people push you into the mud, they expect you to stay down. But sometimes that's exactly where roots grow. They say power reveals the soul. I saw that truth walk into a town hall meeting in stilettos, and a designer coat councilwoman, Deborah Langston, mother of one of the boys who pushed me into the mud. She smiled like she owned the room, and maybe she did. At least she thought she did. The Mud Project was barely 3 weeks old and already buzzing like a beehive. A local business offered weekly food donations. The First Street Church gave us a wing of their basement to use as a shelter warming center. But with our momentum growing, we ran into our first wall permits. We needed city clearance to expand Outreach host weekend events and apply for small business grants to operate officially. That brought us face to face with Deborah Langston, the very same woman who 2 weeks ago had refused to apologize publicly. She hadn't spoken a word to me during the school board meeting. Not when her son was suspended. Not when Rosa handed her the footage of what he'd done. She had stayed silent, icy behind her pearl earrings. Now she sat behind the long council desk, tapping a pen, slowly smiling with tight lips. "The council has reviewed your proposal," she said, eyes flicking over the paper as if it were infected. "And while we applaud your enthusiasm, we have concerns. Safety, regulation, liability. It's quite ambitious, Miss Johnson. Not Miss Etta, not even ma'am, just Miss Johnson. Cold, dismissive." Rosa leaned forward. "We have the community behind us. Over 2,000 petition signatures. Letters from the mayor's office. We're not asking for special treatment, just fairness. Fairness." Deborah tilted her head. Fair would be expecting people to follow the law. We can't approve a permit just because people are emotionally invested. There it was, the tone. That veiled venom women like me know too well. I felt my breath catch, but I held it in. I looked at her and saw something under that polished exterior. A tightness, a fear. She wasn't just against me. She was afraid of what I represented. A poor, black elderly woman, homeless, no longer standing eye to eye with the powerful and unashamed. Because now I had a voice. The vote stalled that night. 3 yes, 3 no. 1 abstention. We would have to wait another week. Outside the hall, Rosa was livid. She's blocking us out of spite. But I had seen something else. Her son, Jaden Langston, had been there, sitting in the back, alone. He'd looked different, not smug like before. He looked haunted. I approached him. His eyes met mine, and for the first time they didn't look past me. "I'm sorry," he said, voice cracking. "I know it's late. I didn't think it would get this big." "It got big because it was never small," I replied. He stared at the ground. "My mom. She told me to stay quiet, but I want to talk, to help." "You can start," I said gently, "by speaking at next week's vote." He blinked. "You want me to speak after what I did? I want you to tell the truth. That's what matters." He nodded slowly. "Okay." The next 7 days were a storm of planning and pressure. We released videos of the Mud Project's work meals, delivered coats, donated interviews with shelter workers' testimonials from people we'd helped. The town was listening, watching, but Deborah was watching too. 2 days before the vote, a city code inspector showed up at the church and cited us for improper food storage threatening to shut down the warming center. It was a warning shot, one meant to scare us back into the shadows. But we didn't retreat. Instead, we fought smarter. Rosa contacted the city paper. They published an op-ed with the headline, "The woman in the mud is changing this city. Why is power pushing back?" And then it happened. The twist. The next morning, the second video was leaked. Not the one of me falling, but one from the councilwoman's own home security system. Her son Jaden had retrieved it from the cloud. It showed him bragging about shoving the old lady with his friends laughing, and her voice off camera saying, "You need to delete that before anyone finds out." She'd known. She'd covered it up. The footage spread like wildfire. And suddenly, the narrative changed. This wasn't just a story about teens gone wild. It was about power, about protection, about a mother who'd chosen status over responsibility. The city exploded. Protesters gathered outside the town hall. A recall petition launched that night. At the next council meeting, the energy was electric. Tension thick as thunderclouds. Seats were filled walls lined with people standing. Jaden stepped up to the mic. "I hurt someone," he said plainly. "I hurt Miss Etta, and my mom tried to hide that. But that's not what I want to be." He turned, found me in the crowd. "You gave me a second chance. I want to use it right." Silence hung in the air. Then applause. Real, raw, growing like a tidal wave. I walked up next my cane, tapping with every step. "I don't want vengeance," I said. "I want vision. A town that uplifts, not buries. A place where we don't silence the weak to shield the powerful." I turned toward the councilwoman. Her hands were clenched, her jaw tight. But she did not interrupt. This time she knew better. The vote came minutes later. 6-1. Permit approved. The Mud Project was now official. As the crowd erupted, Rosa pulled me into a hug so tight I thought I'd float. "You did it," she whispered. "No," I said, voice trembling. "We did." But even as joy surged through the room, I glanced toward Deborah Langston, who sat motionless, her empire cracking. And I realized something. Sometimes justice isn't about punishment. Sometimes it's about watching the mighty realize they were never untouchable. That night, we lit candles outside the warming center. Dozens came, and for the first time in years, people sang. Laughter rang, and a woman who once slept in the mud stood tall among them, no longer alone. Because the mud might have started it, but the fire belonged to us. The sky broke open 2 days after the permit passed. Rain poured in, sheets drumming against the pavement like a warning, like a song only the forgotten could understand. I stood beneath the awning outside the Mud Project's new space, our space, and watched as the world washed itself clean. Rosa was inside rearranging donated winter coats on metal racks. Jaden Langston had come by that morning to help set up cots. He moved quietly, politely changed. Some wounds become seeds, I thought, and some shame becomes fertilizer for redemption. But I was restless. Something inside me churned like the storm clouds above, because when you've lived on the street, even a bed doesn't make you feel safe. Even applause doesn't make you feel seen. Not truly. Not where it matters most. And that's when I saw it. A figure. A woman. Soaked to the bone umbrella lost hair clinging to her face. Melinda. My daughter. My heart seized. She hadn't called. Hadn't written. Hadn't even left a voicemail in 3 years. And now she was here. I stepped into the rain without thinking. It soaked through my cardigan instantly, chilling my bones, but none of it mattered. She stopped 2 feet from me. Her eyes were red, cheeks streaked. I saw the video, she said softly. All of it. I nodded, unsure if I should speak. My voice felt like paper-thin, fragile. I didn't know you were sleeping outside Mama. That stung. I told you. Her face crumpled. I know. And I told myself you'd figure it out. That you were strong. That I didn't have room for your pain on top of mine. The storm around us swelled, but in that moment it was quiet between us. The kind of quiet that can only exist between a mother and daughter who've loved each other deeply and broken each other harder. She reached into her purse, pulling out an envelope. This was Daddy's. I found it cleaning the attic last week. I took it, hands trembling. The paper was faded edges, curled. I hadn't seen his handwriting since the funeral. I stepped under the awning, tore it open with fingers both hungry and afraid. My Etta, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone. But I need you to know something. You were always the strongest woman I knew. You kept us fed. You kept us together. If the world ever turns on you, don't you ever believe you are alone. You are made of roots and fire. Etta May. Even if the mud comes, you rise. And if Melinda forgets that, remind her. Remind her of the hands that rocked her to sleep and braided her hair. Remind her you were always there, even when the world turned its back. I love you, always. James. My chest heaved. Tears blurred the world. When I looked up, Melinda was crying too. I should have come sooner, she whispered. You're here now, I said, and then we hugged. Not like strangers reuniting, but like wounds choosing to scar together instead of apart. That night, she came inside the center and met Rosa. She hugged Jaden, thanked him for helping, and when the guests arrived, 20 unhoused folks from under the highway, she helped serve chili and hand out socks. No fanfare, just quiet penance. Later, we sat together near the heater. I want to help, she said. Not just you. This, all of this. I smiled, weary but full. It's not mine anymore. It's everyone's. But not everyone had let go of the past. The next morning, Rosa rushed in with a paper in her hand. They're trying to shut us down, she gasped. It was a cease and desist notice. Signed by Councilwoman Langston, using zoning codes, fire regulations, noise complaints, all paper shields hiding one ugly truth she was retaliating. She won't stop until she buries us, Rosa said. She's scared, I replied. Of what? Of what happens when people stop fearing her and start following each other instead. We called a meeting that night. Community members, local business owners, church leaders, and press packed the center. Even the mayor sent a rep. And this time, I didn't just stand before them as a victim. I stood as a leader. She tried to shut down this space with words on paper, I said. But we've written something stronger. Hope. Action. Community. The crowd clapped. Cameras flashed. I held up the cease and desist letter. You want to see what fear looks like, I asked. I ripped the letter in half. This is what it looks like when the people who used to be stepped on stand up. They roared. 2 days later, Councilwoman Langston was forced to issue a public retraction after pressure from the mayor's office and a public protest outside City Hall led by youth from Jefferson High. Her political future uncertain, ours bright. That weekend, Melinda brought Carter and Elijah to visit me. They ran into my arms, no longer ashamed, no longer distant. I cooked again. Just simple soup and cornbread in Rosa's little kitchen. But it tasted like Sunday. It tasted like home. Sometimes the rain comes before the flowers. Sometimes a letter in the storm is all it takes to bridge 3 years of silence. And sometimes the mud is where new things grow. The news trucks pulled away one by one. Their tires kicked up little rivers of dust as they disappeared down Main Street, satellite dishes folding in like wings. The headlines had been written. The interviews aired. America had cried for Miss Etta, but now the cameras were gone, and I stood at the edge of a new kind of silence. Not the silence of the alley where I once huddled beneath a broken vent and prayed no one found me. No, this was the silence of after. The silence of what now, because attention fades fast, and once it does, the real work begins. Rosa and I sat in the back room of the mud project that morning, her hair twisted in a scarf, her hands wrapped around a chipped mug. "We're almost out of winter gloves," she said, "and 2 of the cots need replacing." I nodded, flipping through donation logs. The grant from Street Angels will help, but it won't last forever. Outside, Melinda was helping an elderly veteran fill out housing paperwork. A month ago, she could barely look at me without guilt in her eyes. Now she stood steady sleeves, rolled up, voice firm and warm. I was thinking. Rosa hesitated. What if we opened a second center on the west side? My heart skipped. Should we? And then I smiled. We've come this far, haven't we? But not everyone was smiling. That evening, while locking up Rosa, found it first a message scrawled in red spray paint across the bricks. "Get back in the mud!" The letters bled like an old wound. Like the town was trying to claw back the power it had lost. We stared at it together, speechless. Jaden arrived minutes later, and when he saw it, his fists clenched. "I'll clean it," he said, voice trembling. "No," I said. They turned to me. "I want people to see it first." The next morning, we posted a photo of the vandalism online, captioned it with a quote from one of our shelter guests. "You can paint hate on a wall, but you can't unwrite what we've built." The response was instant. Donations doubled that day. Volunteers signed up in record numbers. A local artist offered to repaint the entire wall with a mural of our choosing, and so we did. It took a week. During that time, the wall remained raw and ugly, a wound exposed. But on the 7th day, the brush strokes began. Children dipped their fingers in color. Teenagers painted outlines of hope. Elders dabbed flowers and doves and flames. In the center of it all, a portrait of a woman in a coat arms, outstretched, standing in the mud, but unbowed. They called it the Rise. During the mural's unveiling, a hush fell over the crowd. I was asked to speak again. I didn't prepare anything. I didn't need to. "This wall used to be a place of hate," I said. "But now it's a canvas. And every stroke says the same thing, we do not go back." I looked out at them, people from every walk of life. Homeless, housed, black, white, young, old. There will be more hate, I said. More vandalism. More attempts to erase us. But we've already written our names in the heart of this town. And that can't be painted over. The applause felt like a rising tide, and this time it wasn't just for me. It was for all of us. That night, Melinda stayed over. She brought photos from the old days' birthdays picnics, even one of James in his army uniform holding baby Carter. We laughed, we cried, and at one point she reached over, held my hand, and said, "I lost my way, Mama, but you helped me find it again." I squeezed back. "You just needed a map, and maybe a little mud on your boots." Days passed, then weeks. The second center opened. Jaden became our full-time outreach coordinator. Rosa took on grant writing, and me, I became the face, the voice, the steady hand behind every welcome hug, every late-night cup of tea, every trembling soul who walked through our doors hoping to feel human again. One afternoon, a young woman arrived, thin, pale clothes, 2 sizes too big. She wouldn't speak, just stared at the floor. When I brought her tea, she flinched. I sat beside her quiet. After a while, I said, I once had to choose between buying food and buying a bus ticket home. I picked the food, and that's how I ended up sleeping behind a supermarket for 6 months. She looked at me. "I don't know who you are," she whispered. I smiled. "I'm you, just a few years ahead." And for the first time, she nodded. The world didn't change overnight. The shelters were still full. The rent was still high. The councilwoman was still on the radio twisting her story, calling us radicals and a threat to tradition. But now we had armor, not made of steel, but of story, of survival, of solidarity. Sometimes I still walk past that alley. I don't do it to remember the pain. I do it to measure the distance between who I was and who I am now. From the mud to the mural, from invisible to unstoppable. It was the first Saturday of spring when the town did something I never thought possible. They stopped, all of them. The baker closed early. The school locked its doors. Even the mayor showed up with rolled-up sleeves and a heart full of something we hadn't seen from City Hall in decades: humility. Because that morning, under skies clear as stained glass, the town held its first ever Rise from the Mud Day. And I stood at the center of it all, not as a victim, not as a viral story, but as a woman, as Etta Mae Johnson. They set the stage on the old courthouse lawn right where I used to pass every Thursday to collect leftover bagels from the bakery. Now, 100 folding chairs stretched before me. Hand-painted signs flapped gently in the breeze. We see you. Community over cruelty. No one belongs in the mud. Children handed out daffodils. Teenagers gave out hot tea. Rosa coordinated every detail, her clipboard dancing, as she orchestrated the day like a conductor. And there, front row, was my family. Melinda, Elijah, Carter, all dressed in yellow, the color of resilience. Jaden spoke first. When I pushed Miss Etta, he said into the mic, "I thought it was funny. I thought being cruel made me powerful. But real power isn't in fists or followers. It's in lifting others." He turned to me, voice breaking. "Thank you for not giving up on people like me." The crowd applauded, and I saw more than just forgiveness in their eyes. I saw transformation. Then it was my turn. I stood slowly, cane in hand, heart pounding like it did the first time I stepped in front of the school board. I fell into the mud, I began, but I wasn't the only one who was dirty. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Because the mud isn't just physical, it's everywhere. It's in how we treat the voiceless, how we judge the poor, how we let dignity become optional. I paused, watching the weight of those words settle on every shoulder. But mud, I continued, isn't the enemy. Mud grows gardens. Mud anchors trees. Mud is where life begins. I looked out at them all: shop owners, bus drivers, teens, pastors, the once apathetic, and the never seen. This town didn't push me down. 3 boys did. But this town picked me up. this town changed. I held up the envelope James had written years ago, the one Melinda found, and so did I. As I stepped down, the mayor approached. "Miss Etta," he said, "on behalf of this city, I'd like to present you with this." He handed me a plaque in honor of Etta Mae Johnson for reminding us who we are. I blinked through tears. Then I heard it soft at first, then stronger. Clapping, cheering, whistling. It grew and grew until the whole town was on its feet, and I knew something had shifted forever. Later that evening, we held a candlelight vigil outside the Mud Project. But it wasn't somber. It was luminous. Laughter floated between verses of "Lean on Me." Children danced under string lights. Volunteers served soup beside local chefs. Someone played violin. Someone else braided hair. And in the center of it all was our mural. The Rise, lit up by soft golden lights. People lined up to touch it, to leave notes, to pray, to remember that we can all rise no matter how far we've fallen. Rosa found me near the heater, a blanket draped over my knees. "You okay?" she asked. I nodded, overwhelmed but calm. "I keep thinking about that day," I said. "How cold the mud felt. How loud their laughter was." She was quiet for a moment. "But it doesn't hurt any more," I added, "because now Rosa said you're the one holding the mic." Melinda knelt beside me. She took my hand, and for the first time since my husband's death, I felt truly whole. "I want to carry on your work, Mama," she said. "I want my boys to grow up in a town where kindness is normal." I touched her face. "They already are, baby." And then the final surprise came. The town unveiled a second mural, this one on the west side where the second shelter had opened. It showed dozens of faces, old and young, wrapped in a single thread of gold. At the bottom it read, "From the mud we rise together." They tried to bury me in the mud, but I wasn't a corpse, I was a seed. And from that seed grew a garden so wide, so fierce, it fed the very town that once starved my spirit. This isn't just my story, it's ours, yours. So if you ever feel like you've been shoved to the ground, laughed at, silenced, remember this: you are not the mud. You are the miracle waiting beneath it. I was shoved into the mud like I was nothing. But the truth is, I was never nothing. I was someone's mother, someone's grandmother, someone's neighbor. And most importantly, I was still someone. That single cruel act didn't just humiliate me. It awakened something first in one kind stranger, then in a town, and eventually in a nation that remembered what dignity looks like. This story isn't just about a homeless grandmother. It's about how one moment of injustice, when witnessed by the right eyes, can ripple outward and spark a movement. I found my voice not by rising above the mud, but by rising from it. And that mud is where we plant seeds, for healing, for justice, for change. So, if you're watching this and you've ever felt ignored, discarded, silenced, let this be your reminder. Your worth is not measured by your circumstance. It's measured by your courage to stand again. If this story moved, you make sure to subscribe for more powerful, real-life dramas that spark justice and hope. Leave a comment. Share your story. Your voice matters here. Turn on notifications so you never miss a reminder that even in the darkest corners of society, there is always light waiting to rise. You are not invisible. We see you. We stand with you.